As children, most of us were taught to follow the golden rule. Treat others like we'd like to be treated. But this doesn't work when we're crossing generational boundaries. Here at Psygenx, we can help you to be successful no matter what generation you're dealing with. When I was a kid, I played Little League. I went to practice every day. We did drills. I ran the bases. And when we had a game, we had a real pitcher. Not some little kid, but a 12-year-old who looked like a 22-year-old with a full beard and tattoos, it seemed to me as a kid. Anyway, that pitcher would get up there and he'd throw the ball as hard as he could, 60, 70, 80 miles an hour maybe, if you really had a good one. And I would strike out a lot. But if I were lucky to get up on base, run around the bases and slide into home, well, I'd get a little scratched up because the cinders were on the track. There was a little crying in baseball. But it was good, it was real, and it toughened me up. And that was my experience as a Generation X. A few years ago, I went to my nephew's t-ball game. I'd never been to a t-ball game before. I didn't know what it was. I thought the T was for a little tyke or whatever, but it turns out a T is for a plastic tee. And you don't have a pitcher at all. You just have a plastic tee you put the ball on. Pretty much every kid can take a swing and hit the ball. Anyway, I showed up to this game. It was a few innings into it, and I ran up to the field and I said, "Hey, what's the score?" Boom! 3 parents tackled me to the ground. They said, "We do not keep score at t-ball." And I'm like, "Really? Well, how do you play this t-ball thing?" "Well, you get up to the tee, you take a swing, you hit the ball." I said, "So great, so you hit the ball, somebody catches it, you're out." They're like, "Oh, no, Jeff. There are no outs in t-ball." See, what happens is every kid gets up, they take a swing, they hit the ball, and we get on base. And when every kid on the team has had a chance to get on base, then we come around and we're all winners. And I thought, this is about the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Millennials have a much different experience than I did as Gen X, that's for sure. Today we're going to be talking about generations at work and unlocking the power of generational psychology. When most people talk about generations, they talk about them in a linear fashion. One generation follows the next. Silent generation, followed by boomers, followed by Gen X, followed by millennials. The theory I'm going to share with you today talks about generations as cyclical, repeating one after the other. There are 4 distinct generational archetypes or generational personalities: the hero, the artist, the prophet, and the nomad. Each one of these generational personalities has a unique story to tell and a unique role in society. These generations interact, and when you stack them all together from oldest to youngest, society actually moves and changes in predictable ways. It's one of the great powers of this theory. The slide that you see here is the generational Loch Ness Monster. It describes birth years starting in 1901 and going to 2004. For example, if you look at the prophet archetype, or the baby boomers, they're typically described as 1946 to 1964. I have them as 1943 to 1960. And the reason for that is those demographers out there on the popular press are talking about when people are born. And that's an important part of this theory. But what I'm describing here is where the generational divides are between them. So how people think, act, and behave. And for this, boomers are described as 43 to 60. Those people that are born in those years are more like baby boomers than they are nomad or artist archetype or silent and Gen X. So you can see here each one of these generations lining up to a title that you've seen in the popular press. So we have the GI generation as a hero archetype, followed by the silent generation who are artists, followed by the boomers who are prophet, followed by nomad, Gen X, and last but not least, another hero, millennial. Another thing that you should know, and this starts to explain why me and so many of my other colleagues who are Gen Xers have these kind of bad attitudes and why we're cynical and so forth, is that there's a dominant and recessive generation. When there's an article about what the generations are up to, they're usually talking about boomers or millennials. They don't give a lot of coverage to those of us in the recessive generations, the artists and the nomad archetypes. We're not like the other generations. We don't really in the recessive generations, we don't flex our collective muscles. So when we're mad at our politicians, for example, what do? Well, we don't vote. That's what we do. And if those politicians don't change their wicked ways, well, in the future, we don't vote twice as hard. So take that. And so those of you that are maybe starting to watch this presentation are worried that somehow I'm going to get all these Gen Xers riled up. It's never going to happen, all right? We just don't do that. We're not joiners, right? Where's the fight going to come? Who's going to push out the baby boomers who are currently in charge today? Well, it's going to be the next dominant generation. It's going to be their own kids, the Millennials. That's where the fight's going to come from. When you stack up the generations, they're a little bit like dominoes. Each generation, when it moves through time, it falls and impacts the next one. Now let's look at the Gen X story. Let's take a look at that domino there. And as you can see, as a child, they weren't indulged like a boomer, they were abandoned. Now you might say to me, hey Jeff, how do we go in 20 years from indulging boomers to abandoning these Gen X? Well, you got to look at who our parents were. They were largely silent generation folks and older baby boomers. Silent generation folks, they kept their head down, they did what they were told, they were process oriented, they followed the rules, then they lived in the society that was set up by the GI generation. And when they got to their 50s, they did something extraordinary. They invented the midlife crisis. They started getting divorced in record numbers. Dad got a leisure suit and a gold chain. Divorced mom got a Corvette, went out clubbing, drinking and snorting coke and having a great old time. If these baby boomers could have fun, why couldn't the silent generation? And that's what they did. They went out and had fun, and they left their kids at home to raise themselves like wolves. Now let's look at the story of the Millennials. They have a much different story than the Gen X or the boomers. They weren't abandoned as kids. They were protected. Now wait, you might say, how do we go from abandoning these no-good Gen Xers to protecting these adorable Millennials? Well, who are their parents? Largely younger baby boomers and older Gen Xers. They saw things that had gone too far with the Gen X, too much teen pregnancy, too much drug abuse, and they said, you know what, let's forget about these Gen Xers and let's start over with these adorable Millennials. So they invented things like No Child Left Behind. They came up with school uniforms, with teacher testing, with standardized testing. They came up with things like bike helmets and car seats, and really made sure that these kids had everything. When they got to be a little bit older, they gave them cell phones, they gave them computers with internet access, they gave them books to read, new textbooks, they gave them everything that they needed to be successful, and they shielded them from failure. Do you know, when I was a kid, as a Gen Xer, we used to go to the bowling alley. I'd get up there, I'd grab a ball, I'd roll it down the alley, kind of granny style, and if I could knock down a couple of pins, I felt fantastic. Today, you know, it's impossible to throw a gutter ball as a Millennial. They have these little walls that pop up on the side of the bowling alley. You throw the ball, bonk, 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 and you knock down pins. Everything that you try to do as a Millennial, you succeed. It's quite a way to grow up. Today, baby boomers are the man. They're the dominant force in business. It's their generational archetype. It's their way of doing things that's really the model of how we get things done. But increasingly, we're seeing pressure from the millennial generation who want to do things different. In fact, they want to do far less talking and far more doing. And we're going to see this battle play out in ever-increasing intensity over the next few years, with Gen X in the middle trying to referee between these two dominant groups as we change how we do work, where we do work, and what it means to be successful. When I was a kid, I didn't have a Leave It to Beaver mother at home. I had a latchkey. I'd get up in the morning and make my own breakfast, walk myself to the bus, and then take an hour bus ride to school. I raised myself and took care of the neighbor kids. That's just what we did. Today, Gen X, like the other generations, are moving into a different role. We're becoming midlife leaders, fulfilling new role in society. And this role is something that doesn't necessarily come easy to Gen X. We were ignored and criticized as children, and so giving others praise and encouragement and positive feedback just isn't something that we want, and it's something that's hard for us to give. So as we're working with other people, it's going to be important for us to give them what they need to be successful, not just what a Generation X person would want for her or himself. The Millennials are a different breed. They're not like Gen X. They're not cynical. They're not sarcastic. They're positive. They have a can-do attitude. They're willing to work in groups, and they're willing to do things. They're a much different animal than Gen X. We told these kids when they were little that they could change the world. And you know what? The little suckers believed us. So they've come here into the business world, and they're trying to change things. Now that you know about each of the generations, it's important to know, hey, now what do I do about it? To work successfully with the generations, communications and rewards are critical. When we talk about communication, boomers, it's got to be face-to-face. That's where real relationships are made. For Gen X, we want something more transactional, like an email or maybe a text. And for millennials, literally, it's just text me, dude. If you want to get a hold of a millennial, you call them on the phone, they're not going to answer it. You try to leave them a voicemail, it hasn't been set up, and more importantly, it hasn't been checked in 6 months. If you want to get a hold of a millennial, text them. They'll text you back. Now that you know a little bit about each generation, it's important to focus on what you can do to bring them together. If we look at these different generations, we can see each one has a different work preference, a different way that they interact, and a different style that's important to take into consideration. Some of the needs that are different for a boomer, they need to vent. If you want a boomer to connect with what you're doing, you need to invite them to a meeting and say, Sally, Steve, how do you feel about it? Hand them the mic and find out. That's how you really connect. For Gen X, we don't really care how you're doing. Give us a task and get out of the way. We'll figure it out. That's our motto, figure it out. For millennials, they need to know why they're doing something. They need inspiration. They need to know that what they're doing is contributing to the bottom line, that it's making a difference for the world. They need to feel that what they're doing is important and connected. I want to draw your attention to one of the areas that I, as a Generation X person, make a lot of mistakes, and that's the focus on process versus results. For baby boomers, process is key. If you're making a decision, how a decision is made is important, or I would say even more important than what that decision is. They want to make sure that everyone is involved, everyone is heard. For me in Generation X, I don't really care about the process. I want to know the bottom line. A few years ago, I was working with a group of baby boomers. We were working with our boss, and they had come up with a way to redesign how we were going to work with clients. They wanted everyone to be involved in this decision. So they came to our all-hands meeting, and they had a 1 hour and 45-minute reenactment of this meeting, everyone playing their part from our boss to the members of the team. As a Gen X person, it was excruciating. But for the boomers in the room, it really made them feel connected to that decision. Most people follow the golden rule. They treat others like they want to be treated. And that works fine when you're talking to your own generation. But when you're working across generation, the things that you do to bring comfort, to show respect, can be actually the opposite of what you intended. So when you're working across generations and you don't know the person, guess what the generation would like first. Remember, keep what generations like in mind, and you'll be a lot more successful than just giving people what you would like. Here at Psygenx, we're working to unlock the power of generational psychology to help you and your business succeed. You can reach me via email, on our Psygenx.com homepage, or on our Facebook fan page.